September 21st, 1944. 0540 hours, somewhere east of Aracourt, France. Oberleutnant Klaus Beumer sat in the commander's cupola of his Panther OSF-G, watching the pre-dawn mist crawl across the Lorraine countryside. The engine idled with that characteristic deep rumble that had become the soundtrack of German armored superiority. 44.8 tons of Krupp steel, a 75mm KW K-42 gun capable of penetrating any Allied tank at 2,000 meters, frontal armor 120 millimeters thick. By every measure of military engineering, Beumer commanded one of the most formidable fighting vehicles ever created. His company, part of the 113th Panzer Brigade, had arrived in France just 3 weeks earlier. Fresh from the factories, their Panthers still smelled of new paint and machine oil. The crews were experienced, veterans rotated from the Eastern Front where they had learned to respect Soviet T-34s but never to fear them. The Americans, by all accounts, fielded nothing comparable. Their Shermans were adequate, their tank destroyers slow and predictable. This counteroffensive, personally ordered by the Führer to recapture Nancy and sever Patton's supply lines, should be straightforward. At 0615, Beumer heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the physics of armored warfare. High-pitched, almost like an aircraft engine, but coming from ground level. Before he could identify the source, 3 rapid cracks split the morning air. His radio crackled with panicked German, "Contact front, enemy Panzerjäger, moving fast, extremely fast." Through his field glasses, Beumer caught a glimpse of something that violated every principle he had learned at Paderborn Panzer School. A low silhouette, barely visible through the mist, fired what appeared to be 3 rounds in rapid succession, then vanished. Not withdrew tactically. Vanished. The entire engagement lasted perhaps 15 seconds. 2 of his platoon's Panthers were burning. What Oberleutnant Beumer had just encountered was the M18 Hellcat, an American tank destroyer that would fundamentally alter German tactical doctrine, and more significantly, German tanker psychology. Within 6 weeks, the mere report of Hellcats in a sector would cause German commanders to request infantry support, artillery preparation, and air reconnaissance before committing armor. An American vehicle weighing less than 18 tons, with armor thin enough to be penetrated by 20mm anti-aircraft guns, had achieved something neither the Soviet T-34 nor the British Churchill ever managed. It made German panzer crews afraid. The mathematics seemed impossible. German intelligence had obtained detailed specifications of the M18 through captured documents by August 1944. On paper, it appeared to be a joke. Maximum armor thickness, 25 millimeters on the turret front. Hull sides, 13 millimeters. A German soldier could theoretically penetrate it with a Panzerfaust at any angle. The vehicle weighed 17.7 tons compared to the Panther's 44.8 or the Tiger's 54 tons. It mounted a 76mm gun, respectable, but inferior to the Panther's 75mm in penetration power, and vastly inferior to the 88mm guns on Tigers and Jag Panthers. By every conventional measure, the M18 should have been a death trap. German doctrine, refined through 5 years of total war, held certain truths to be self-evident. Armor protection was paramount. A tank that couldn't survive hits couldn't remain on the battlefield. Weight indicated capability. Heavier vehicles were inherently superior. Stability was essential for accurate gunnery. Lighter vehicles would be poor firing platforms. Speed was secondary to firepower and protection. The M18 violated every single principle. Yet within 8 weeks of its first major combat deployment at Aracourt, German after-action reports began using words never before applied to American armor. Unpredictable, extremely dangerous, priority threat. These weren't the assessments of green recruits or second-line troops. These came from veteran panzer commanders who had fought at Kursk, who had survived the Korsun pocket, who had learned to respect but never truly fear the vast Soviet tank armies. The transformation of German thinking about the M18 reflected something deeper than simple tactical adaptation. It represented the collision between German engineering philosophy, perfected over 5 years of war, and American industrial pragmatism that asked different questions entirely. German designers asked, "How do we make our tanks invulnerable?" American designers asked, "Do our tanks need to be invulnerable to be effective?" The answer the M18 embodied was profoundly disturbing to German tactical thought. No, they didn't. Understanding why the M18 generated such disproportionate fear among German forces requires understanding the context of September 1944. Germany was losing the war, but German panzer forces weren't losing battles. Not yet. Not consistently. The Normandy breakout had been catastrophic, but panzer divisions continued to demonstrate tactical superiority in individual engagements. At Mortain, German armor had come dangerously close to cutting off the American breakout. In the Falaise pocket, German tanks had held open escape routes against overwhelming odds. Individual German tank crews still regularly achieved kill ratios of 3 or 4 to 1 against Allied armor. This context is critical. German panzer forces in September 1944 remained confident in their tactical doctrine, their equipment, and their training. They understood they were outnumbered. They accepted that Allied air power was overwhelming. They knew logistical collapse was inevitable. But in tank versus tank combat, they still believed in their qualitative superiority. Panthers and Tigers were genuinely superior to Shermans in direct engagements. German gunners trained longer and shot more accurately. German tactics emphasized the defensive advantages of superior range and armor. The 5th Panzer Army's counteroffensive at Aracourt represented this confidence. General Hasso von Manteuffel, one of Germany's most capable panzer commanders, assembled 2 newly formed brigades, the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. These weren't scraped-together remnants. They were fresh units equipped with the latest Panther models, crewed by men rotated from the Eastern Front specifically for this operation. The tactical plan was sound. Strike the flanks of Patton's Third Army, force it to halt its advance, buy time for the West Wall defenses to be completed. The terrain favored German doctrine. The rolling hills of Lorraine provided excellent defensive positions for hull-down Panthers to engage at maximum range. Wooded areas restricted maneuver, negating American numerical superiority. Weather forecasts predicted continued fog and low clouds, grounding Allied air power. Von Manteuffel expected losses, certainly, but calculated that German tactical superiority would prevail in the crucial initial 48 hours. No one in the German planning staff seriously considered the M18 as a significant threat factor. Intelligence reports mentioned American tank destroyers, of course, but assumed they would conform to established patterns. Previous American tank destroyers, the M10 and M36, were formidable in defensive positions but predictable in behavior. They would occupy prepared positions, fight from ambush, then withdraw when pressed. Standard German tactics handled them adequately. Suppress with artillery, flank with infantry, or bypass and deal with them later. The 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, had been in combat since July. By September, they had developed M18 tactics through hard experience in Normandy and the pursuit across France. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel George Jacobson, understood both the vehicle's capabilities and its limitations with unusual clarity. The after-action reports from the 74th reveal a unit that had moved far beyond doctrine into improvisation. Jacobson's tactical guidance, preserved in the battalion's records, emphasized principles that would have seemed bizarre to German observers. Never occupy the same position twice. Never remain stationary longer than 60 seconds after firing. Always plan 3 firing positions before engaging. Think in terms of seconds, not minutes. Your survival depends on the enemy not knowing where you are or where you'll be. This wasn't the doctrine taught at Fort Hood, the Tank Destroyer Training Center. Official doctrine still emphasized prepared defensive positions, coordination with infantry, mutually supporting fields of fire, all the conventional wisdom of anti-tank warfare. What Jacobson's battalion had discovered through survival was that the M18's extraordinary mobility made conventional doctrine obsolete. They had accidentally stumbled upon something the Wehrmacht would take weeks to understand. The M18 didn't need to win stand-up fights with Panthers. It just needed to ensure Panthers never got stand-up fights. The morning of September 19th saw the first large-scale collision between German confidence and American adaptation. Oberleutnant Beumer's company, advancing in standard formation with Panthers in wedge, expected to encounter American tank destroyers in prepared positions. This was the pattern throughout Normandy. Tank destroyers would be dug in, camouflaged, waiting in ambush. Once located, they could be suppressed and flanked. Instead, at 0620 hours, Lieutenant Edwin Laper's platoon of 4 M18s struck from unexpected directions simultaneously. According to German after-action reports, which describe the engagement with unusual detail, enemy vehicles demonstrated unprecedented tactical mobility. fired from ranges of 400 to 800 meters, then displaced at high speed before our guns could be brought to bear. Estimated enemy vehicle speed, 80 kilometers per hour or higher. This is impossible for tracked vehicles of known types. The number 80 kilometers per hour appears repeatedly in German reports from Iraq with increasing urgency. This was an exaggeration under stress. German tank commanders were experienced professionals who had judged vehicle speeds for years. When they reported 80 kilometers per hour, they were describing what they saw. American tank destroyers moving at speeds they associated with wheeled reconnaissance vehicles, not tracked combat vehicles mounting 76mm guns. Sergeant Henry Hartman's M18 achieved the most extraordinary success that morning. His gunner, Corporal William McDowell, knocked out 6 Panthers in approximately 28 minutes. The German company commander's report, filed hours later from a field hospital, described the engagement with unusual frankness. Enemy vehicle appeared from treeline at approximately 700 meters, fired 2 rounds, both hits. 1 Panther destroyed, 1 damaged. Before we could traverse to engage, enemy vehicle had vanished. 30 seconds later, same vehicle or identical vehicle appeared 400 meters to our left flank. Fired 3 rounds, 2 Panthers destroyed. Again disappeared before we could return fire. This pattern continued. We were unable to fix enemy position or predict next appearance. The critical phrase, same vehicle or identical vehicle. German crews couldn't believe a single tank destroyer could move that quickly between firing positions. They assumed they faced multiple vehicles in coordinated ambush. This assumption was wrong and made their psychological shock worse when they captured an M18 in November and discovered that single vehicles had indeed been engaging entire platoons from multiple positions in rapid sequence. By 0700 hours, the 113th Panzer Brigade's attack had stalled completely. 39 Panthers destroyed or damaged. German losses to American losses, approximately 8-1. The brigade commander, Colonel Erich Wonkensdorf, filed a report that afternoon that would circulate through German panzer commands with increasing alarm. Enemy employs tank destroyer of unknown type. Specifications suggest extreme design philosophy prioritizing speed over protection. Vehicle presents minimal target, engages at medium range, displaces at extraordinary speed. Standard panzer tactics ineffective. Request immediate tactical guidance. That request for guidance reveals everything. The Wehrmacht in September 1944 did not request tactical guidance for dealing with American armor. German doctrine handled American armor adequately. But the M18 had broken German doctrine, and experienced commanders knew it. Within 72 hours, every German panzer unit in 5th Panzer Army had received special briefings on the M18. These briefings, preserved in divisional records, show the evolution of German thinking. Initial reports dismissed the vehicle as a light tank destroyer with excessive speed. Within a week, reports classified it as a high-priority threat requiring special engagement procedures. Within 2 weeks, veteran commanders were requesting that M18 presence in a sector be confirmed before committing armor. This psychological transformation happened faster than the German Army's adaptation to Soviet T-34s, faster than their recognition of the British 17-pounders' lethality. The M18 achieved in weeks what years of Eastern Front combat hadn't fully accomplished. It made German panzer crews doubt their tactical doctrine. The root of this fear wasn't the M18's gun, though the 76mm M1A1 was certainly adequate. It wasn't the vehicle's armor, which was essentially non-existent by German standards. It was the vehicle's fundamental nature as an opponent that couldn't be fought using any established German tactical procedure. Every principle of panzer warfare assumed that engagements had duration. Time to identify target, time to range, time to aim, time to fire, time to assess, time to fire again. The M18 eliminated time as a factor. It appeared, fired, and vanished in windows measuring 15 to 20 seconds. This wasn't warfare. This was ambush predation. German tankers began describing M18 encounters using language that revealed deep psychological impact. Hauptmann Friedrich Maybach, commanding a Tiger company in the 2nd Panzer Division, wrote in his personal diary, "The American Panzerjäger is not like fighting enemy tanks. It is like hunting an animal that is hunting you. You scan the tree line knowing it's there, knowing it can kill you, but you cannot see it. Then suddenly it appears, strikes, and is gone before you can react. Your turret traverse means nothing. Your armor means nothing. The only defense is to not be where it expects you to be, but you cannot know where it expects you. This was not the writing of a panicked recruit. Maybach had fought at Kursk, had commanded a platoon at Korsun, had survived the Cherkasy pocket. He was describing a type of fear qualitatively different from the fear of Soviet mass attacks or Allied air power. It was the fear of being prey. By mid-October 1944, German tactical doctrine had evolved specific procedures for M18 encounters. These procedures, disseminated through 5th Panzer Army and eventually throughout the Western Front, reveal how completely the M18 had disrupted German thinking. The guidance read, when M18 presence is confirmed, advance only with infantry reconnaissance forward. Maintain turrets traversed toward likely displacement routes rather than tracking targets. Employ artillery to suppress suspected positions before armor advance. Do not pursue M18s under any circumstances. Vehicle speed will always exceed our ability to follow. Do not attempt to engage moving M18s with tank main guns. Probability of hit is near zero, and firing reveals your position for their counterfire. Every single one of these procedures represented an admission that German armor couldn't fight M18s on equal terms. The guidance essentially told German tank commanders, avoid engagement if possible, and if engagement is unavoidable, use infantry and artillery because your tanks cannot reliably kill these vehicles. This guidance would have been unthinkable in 1940 or even 1943. The psychological shift it represented was profound. German panzer forces had spent 5 years developing tactical procedures for destroying enemy armor. Now they were being told to avoid a specific enemy vehicle because standard procedures didn't work. The fear the M18 generated was amplified by its rarity. Unlike Shermans, which German crews encountered constantly and learned to defeat consistently, M18s appeared unpredictably. A sector might go weeks without any sightings, then suddenly 3 or 4 would devastate a company in minutes. This unpredictability prevented psychological adaptation. German tankers couldn't become accustomed to M18s because encounters were too infrequent and too brief. Each encounter remained shocking. Hauptmann Dietrich Albrecht, serving with the 9th Panzer Division, described this phenomenon in a letter to his family that was intercepted by Allied censors. We have learned to accept the American tanks. Their numbers are overwhelming, but we understand them. We know how to fight them. But these other vehicles, these tank hunters, they are different. You don't see them until they've already killed someone, then they're gone. The men are more afraid of encountering one Hellcat than an entire company of Shermans. The use of the American nickname, Hellcat, in German communications appeared surprisingly quickly. By November 1944, German situation reports routinely used Hellcat rather than the German designation, M18. This linguistic adoption reflected a kind of psychological surrender. The vehicle had imposed its own identity on German thinking rather than being absorbed into German categorization systems. The technical reality behind German fears became clear when Wehrmacht testing officers examined a captured M18 near Metz in November 1944. The vehicle had been immobilized by a mine, its crew escaping before German infantry secured it. Transported to a testing facility behind the lines, it underwent the same rigorous evaluation process applied to captured Soviet and British equipment. The German technical report, forwarded to the Inspector General of Panzer Forces, reads like a document written by engineers struggling to accept their own measurements. Verified weight, 17.7 metric tons. This was confirmed multiple times because initial readings were dismissed as instrumentation error. A combat vehicle mounting a 76mm gun, carrying ammunition, crew, and fuel, weighing less than half a Panther seemed impossible. Maximum verified speed on test track, 88.5 kilometers per hour. German test drivers, experienced in evaluating captured vehicles, reported that the M18 reached this speed effortlessly. One driver noted, "Vehicle accelerates like a staff car, not a tracked combat vehicle, reaches 50 kilometers per hour in approximately 12 seconds from standstill. This performance exceeds any German tracked vehicle by substantial margin." The power-to-weight ratio explained everything. The Wright R975C4 radial engine produced 400 horsepower in later models. This gave the M18 22.6 horsepower per ton. By comparison, the Panther managed 15.6 horsepower per ton, the Tiger E only 12.8. The M18 could accelerate, maneuver, and maintain speed in conditions where German tanks labored. More disturbing to German engineers was the hydraulic turret traverse system. The report stated, Turret traverse is hydraulically powered by electric motor driving hydraulic pump. System maintains 15 degrees per second traverse rate regardless of engine speed or vehicle movement. This represents significant technical advantage over our engine-dependent traverse systems. German tanks used mechanical traverse systems where turret rotation speed depended on engine RPM. At idle, a Panther's turret traversed at approximately 6 degrees per second, requiring 60 seconds for full rotation. At high engine speed, this improved to 19 degrees per second. But during combat maneuvering, when engine speed varied constantly, traverse rates were unpredictable. The M18's hydraulic system eliminated this variable entirely. The implications were devastating. An M18 traveling at 55 miles per hour could cover 400 meters in 16 seconds. In those 16 seconds, a Panther at idle could traverse its turret only 96 degrees. The Hellcat could appear, fire, and escape before German gunners could even face it. This wasn't a minor tactical disadvantage. It was a fundamental negation of German fire control doctrine. German attempts to develop countertactics revealed the depth of the problem. Hauptmann Werner Stiegler, assigned to develop M18 engagement procedures for the 2nd Panzer Division, conducted tactical experiments using captured vehicles. His conclusions, submitted in December 1944, were pessimistic. Standard engagement procedures are ineffective. Vehicle speed and turret traverse make tracking impossible. Recommended procedure: position tanks hull down with turrets pre-aimed at likely approach routes. Do not attempt to track moving M18s. Wait for vehicle to stop, then engage immediately. Success requires predicting enemy movement patterns, which is unreliable. Stiegler's recommendation essentially told German tank commanders to guess where M18s would appear and hope they guessed correctly. This was operational gambling, not tactical doctrine. That such guidance was seriously considered and distributed reveals how completely the M18 had broken German tactical methodology. The December 1944 Ardennes offensive provided the definitive test of German adaptations. Hitler's last major counteroffensive massed the best available panzer forces, including the rebuilt 2nd Panzer Division, for a breakthrough to Antwerp. The offensive's success depended on speed and surprise, classic German strengths. But the American defense relied heavily on small M18 detachments that turned German strengths against them. At Naval, a critical crossroads north of Bastogne, 4 M18s from the 609th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions faced elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. The engagement occurred in heavy fog, conditions that should have favored German armor by limiting visibility and slowing Allied air power. Instead, the fog became the Hellcats' perfect environment. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion's after-action report describes tactics that evolved specifically for the M18. 4 vehicles engaged 2nd Panzer Division elements using fog for concealment. Engagement sequence: fire 2 to 3 rounds from initial position, immediately displace 200 to 300 yards into fog bank, re-engage from different angle. Enemy forces unable to locate firing positions due to rapid displacement and poor visibility. Multiple enemy vehicles engaged same targets from different positions, creating impression of larger defensive force. By the end of the engagement, 24 German tanks had been destroyed for the loss of 1 M18 to artillery fire. The 2nd Panzer Division's war diary recorded: encountered strong tank destroyer resistance at Naval, enemy vehicles of high mobility operating in fog, unable to effectively engage due to rapid displacement of targets. Turret traverse insufficient to track enemy movement. Attack suspended pending reinforcement. The phrase, attack suspended pending reinforcement, appears nowhere else in 2nd Panzer Division records from the Ardennes. This was a veteran formation that had fought through Normandy and across France. The decision to suspend attack because of 4 tank destroyers represented a psychological victory more significant than the tactical result. German tank crews in the Ardennes began reporting physiological stress symptoms associated with M18 encounters. Unit medical officers noted increased reports of exhaustion, hypervigilance, and what would later be recognized as combat stress reactions, specifically triggered by Hellcat engagements. Oberst Dr. Heinrich Krauss, medical officer for the 9th Panzer Division, wrote, "Crews report extreme stress during operations in sectors where American tank destroyers are present. Symptoms include constant scanning for threats, difficulty sleeping, exaggerated startle responses. These symptoms are more severe than those observed during encounters with Soviet armor, despite higher casualty rates on Eastern Front. This observation is critical. German tankers were experiencing greater psychological stress from M18 encounters than from battles with numerically superior Soviet forces. The difference was predictability. Soviet attacks followed patterns, massed armor, artillery preparation, combined arms coordination. German doctrine could respond. M18s followed no pattern. They appeared, killed, and vanished. German doctrine had no answer. By January 1945, the psychological impact of the M18 had spread throughout German panzer forces in the West. Intelligence summaries from captured German documents show that Wehrmacht commanders tracked M18 unit locations with the same priority they tracked Allied air power and artillery concentrations. Units equipped with Hellcats were flagged as special threat in German situation maps. Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzer Lehr Division, issued guidance that revealed the extent of German psychological adaptation. When M18 presence is confirmed in sector, do not commit armor without infantry reconnaissance and artillery support. Vehicles' mobility makes conventional engagement suicidal. Our Panthers and Tigers possess superior armor and firepower, but cannot engage targets that refuse engagement on our terms. Recommend avoiding sectors with confirmed M18 presence unless operationally essential. This guidance recommended avoiding combat with an enemy tank destroyer. From a commander whose division had been rebuilt twice, who had fought in North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy, such advice represented complete tactical bankruptcy. The fundamental problem German forces never solved was that the M18 operated according to principles outside German tactical comprehension. German armor doctrine assumed mutual engagement. Both sides would fight until one prevailed. The M18 rejected this assumption. It engaged only when advantageous, broke contact at will, and returned unpredictably. This wasn't cowardice. It was a different philosophy of armored warfare that German doctrine couldn't counter. The M18's influence exceeded its numbers. Only approximately 540 M18s reached maximum strength in Europe by March 1945. Compare this to thousands of Shermans, hundreds of other tank destroyers. Yet the psychological impact was disproportionate. German commanders planned operations around M18 presence more carefully than they planned around Sherman concentrations. The fear was amplified by the vehicle's silhouette. The M18's low profile, open turret, and distinctive engine sound made it instantly recognizable. German tank crews developed the ability to identify Hellcats by sound alone, that characteristic high-pitched whine of the right radial engine. The sound triggered immediate stress responses. Veterans described hearing that engine sound and immediately scanning for escape routes rather than preparing to engage. By war's end, the M18 had achieved something no other Allied armored vehicle managed. It had fundamentally altered German tactical behavior. The vehicle that looked wrong, weighed half what doctrine required, and sacrificed armor for speed had proven that in warfare, survival doesn't always favor the strongest or most heavily armed. Sometimes it favors the fastest, the most agile, the most psychologically destabilizing. German tank crews never overcame their fear of the Hellcat because the fear was rational. The mathematics were inescapable. An opponent that could appear, kill, and escape before you could react wasn't an opponent you could defeat through skill or courage. It was a predator operating by different rules, and all your training meant nothing against it. The final accounting of the M18's combat record reveals a story that transcends conventional military statistics. By war's end, approximately 2,570 M18s had been manufactured by Buick Motor Division between July 1943 and October 1944. Of these, 540 reached maximum operational strength in Europe by March 1945. Combat losses totaled 216 vehicles, a 40% loss rate that sounds catastrophic until examined in context. The kill-to-loss ratio stood at 2.3 to 1 in the European theater. By comparison, Sherman tanks achieved approximately 1.2 to 1 against German armor. The M10 Wolverine tank destroyer managed 1.8 to 1. The M18's ratio was respectable but not extraordinary by purely statistical measures. Yet these numbers obscure the vehicle's true impact in ways that military historians struggled to quantify for decades after the war. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which bore the brunt of fighting at Aracourt, compiled detailed engagement records that illuminate the M18's actual combat patterns. Of 372 total combat actions recorded between July 1944 and May 1945, only 91 involved direct anti-tank engagements. The remaining 281 actions involved infantry support, bunker reduction, harassment fire, and what battalion records classified as presence operations, missions where M18s positioned themselves to deter German armor without necessarily engaging. This presence operations category deserves emphasis. By December 1944, American commanders had discovered that simply positioning M18s in a sector often caused German forces to withdraw or refuse to commit armor. The psychological effect had become a weapon in itself. Captain James Leach, operations officer for the 609th Tank Destroyer Battalion, noted in his December situation report, "Enemy forces demonstrate consistent pattern of withdrawing from sectors where M18s are confirmed present. On 3 occasions, enemy armor withdrew from advantageous positions upon reported sighting of our vehicles, even though we had not engaged." This phenomenon represented something unprecedented in armored warfare. German panzer forces, which had demonstrated extraordinary tenacity throughout 5 years of war, were abandoning tactically sound positions because of a vehicle that, on paper, they should have been able to destroy easily. The psychological reversal was complete. German post-war interrogations provide the most revealing insights into this transformation. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey conducted extensive interviews with captured German officers between May and September 1945. These interviews, declassified in the 1970s, contain remarkable admissions from commanders who had built careers on armored warfare excellence. General Major Meinrad von Lauchert, who commanded the 2nd Panzer Division at Bostonia, provided perhaps the most detailed analysis. "The American Hellcat created a psychological problem we never solved. Our doctrine was built on the principle of decisive engagement. Superior German equipment and training would force battle on our terms, and we would prevail through qualitative superiority. The Hellcat rejected this framework entirely. It engaged only when advantageous, broke contact at will, and returned unpredictably. We had no tactical vocabulary for this type of warfare." Von Lauchert continued, "A Sherman we could understand and defeat. It fought our type of battle. The Hellcat fought a different type of battle, one where our advantages became irrelevant. Our thick armor couldn't protect us if we couldn't see the threat. Our powerful guns couldn't hit targets that vanished in seconds. Our superior training couldn't overcome opponents who refused to give us time to apply it." The vehicle exposed a fundamental weakness in German tactical philosophy. We assumed enemy forces would fight the way we fought. The Hellcat didn't. Oberst Rudolf Gerhardt, who served as operations officer for the 5th Panzer Army during the Lorraine campaign, was even more direct. "After Aracourt, we tracked Hellcat locations with the same priority we tracked Allied fighter-bomber concentrations. A sector with confirmed Hellcat presence required different planning. We needed infantry reconnaissance, artillery preparation, air cover if available. We treated Hellcat-equipped units as special threat formations. This was unprecedented. We didn't even do this for Soviet Guards tank armies." The psychological profile of M18 crews themselves reveals why the vehicle succeeded beyond its specifications. Post-war psychological assessments conducted on tank destroyer veterans showed distinct personality patterns. M18 crews scored higher on measures of risk tolerance, lower on measures of seeking security through protection, and significantly higher on adaptive thinking than crews from heavy tank battalions. Staff Sergeant Vernon Miller, 85th Tank Destroyer Battalion, articulated this mindset in a 1946 interview. "Everyone who volunteered for tank destroyers knew what they were getting into. We weren't looking for the safety of thick armor. We wanted to be cavalry, not fortress guards. The M18 attracted people who trusted speed and smarts over sitting still and taking hits. We knew we were vulnerable. That made us careful, not cowards. We thought 3 moves ahead because we had to. One mistake and we were done." Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, described the crew selection process. "Our company commander had a saying, 'I don't want brave idiots, I want smart survivors.' He picked crews who could think under pressure, who didn't panic when things went wrong, who could make decisions in seconds. The M18 needed crews who could handle knowing they had no armor. Not everyone can do that. The guys who washed out usually wanted to transfer to Shermans. Nothing wrong with that. different temperaments for different machines. This crew selection, though informal, created units psychologically optimized for the M18's operational philosophy. German tankers drew confidence from their equipment's protection and firepower. M18 crews drew confidence from their judgment and reflexes. When these two psychological profiles collided in combat, German crews discovered that their source of confidence had become a liability. Their thick armor encouraged them to accept engagements. The M18's thin armor forced its crews to control engagement timing absolutely. Private First Class William Hayward, 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, described this tactical discipline. "We had a rule. If you can't shoot and scoot in under 30 seconds, don't shoot. Better to let a target go than get stuck in a position where Jerry can range you." Some guys from tank battalions thought we were cowards for running, but we weren't running away. We were running to the next firing position. By the time Jerry figured out where we'd been, we were already somewhere else, shooting at him from a different angle. The crew survival rate when M18s were destroyed provides stark evidence of this philosophy's effectiveness. 73% of crew members survived vehicle loss, extraordinary compared to other armored vehicles. Sherman tank crews suffered approximately 40% survival rates when their vehicles were penetrated and burned. German Panther crews fared slightly better at 45 to 50%, primarily due to superior crew compartment design. The M18's survival rate was substantially higher despite having essentially no armor protection. This paradox resolved when examining how M18s were destroyed. The majority of losses came from mines, artillery, and mechanical breakdown rather than direct tank fire. When German armor did achieve hits on M18s, the engagements typically occurred at ranges beyond 800 meters, where German guns had located the M18's position through muzzle flash or track marks. At these ranges, crew escape was possible before German gunners could fire follow-up shots. The M18's open-top turret, considered a vulnerability by conventional standards, actually facilitated rapid crew egress. Sergeant Henry Hartman, whose M18 destroyed 6 Panthers at a Rackort, survived the war despite having 3 different M18s shot out from under him. His account illustrates the vehicle's survivability through mobility. "First time I got hit, we were in a bad position, got greedy trying for one more shot. Panther round went through our engine compartment. We were out of that vehicle in about 5 seconds. Second time, we hit a mine. Third time, we got bracketed by artillery. Every time, we got out because we could move fast, and we didn't have to wait for anyone to unbolt hatches. The open top saved us more than armor ever could have." The M18's influence on post-war armored vehicle development was immediate and global. Within 18 months of war's end, every major military power had begun projects incorporating lessons from the Hellcats' combat success. The philosophical shift was profound. Armor protection, the dominant design criterion for 20 years, was being reconsidered in light of the M18's demonstration that mobility could provide equivalent or superior survivability. The Soviet Union's post-war development revealed perhaps the clearest acknowledgement of the M18's influence. Soviet doctrine had always emphasized mass and firepower over individual vehicle sophistication. Yet in 1947, the Red Army initiated development of the PT-76 amphibious light tank, a vehicle that prioritized speed and deployability over armor protection. The PT-76's specifications, 14 tons with maximum armor of 14 millimeters, reflected principles the M18 had proven in combat. Soviet military theorists, in classified doctrine documents translated during the Cold War, explicitly cited the M18's combat record as justification for accepting thin armor in exchange for strategic mobility. British post-war development followed similar patterns. The Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tracked Series, initiated in 1946, embodied what British designers called reconnaissance through mobility rather than armor. These vehicles, designed for rapid battlefield reconnaissance, accepted vulnerability in exchange for speeds approaching 40 miles per hour. British doctrine explicitly noted that the M18 had demonstrated that lightly armored vehicles could survive through superior mobility, even in high-threat environments. France's AMX-13 light tank, entering service in 1953, represented perhaps the most direct conceptual descendant of the M18. Weighing 15 tons with maximum armor of 40 millimeters, the AMX-13 mounted a 75 millimeter gun in an oscillating turret that could traverse 360 degrees in 5 seconds. The design philosophy was explicitly influenced by M18 combat, reports that French liaison officers had studied during their attachment to American armored divisions in 1944 and 45. Most tellingly, West Germany itself reversed its wartime armor philosophy in what amounted to a conceptual surrender to principles the M18 embodied. The Leopard 1 main battle tank, entering service in 1965, featured relatively thin armor by German standards, maximum 70 millimeters on the turret front, in exchange for exceptional mobility and a powerful gun. German designers, many of whom had worked on Panther and Tiger development during the war, explicitly acknowledged in technical documents that the Leopard's design philosophy represented a rejection of World War II German doctrine. Generalleutnant Hans-Karl Steinkamp, who served on the Leopard Development Committee and had commanded a Panther battalion in 1944, stated in a 1968 interview, "We designed the Panther to survive hits and destroy enemies through superior firepower. This philosophy failed against vehicles like the American Hellcat that refused to fight on our terms. The Leopard represents what we learned. Mobility and first-shot kill capability matter more than armor thickness." The Americans understood this in 1943. It took us 20 years to accept it. Modern wheeled tank destroyers represent the M18's most direct conceptual descendants. The Italian Centauro, entering service in 1991, features 8-wheeled mobility providing speeds up to 62 miles per hour, mounting a 105 millimeter gun. Maximum armor is only 40 millimeters. The design explicitly prioritized mobility for survivability. Italian doctrine for Centauro employment uses language remarkably similar to M18 tactical manuals. Engage rapidly from unexpected positions, displace immediately after firing, never remain stationary under enemy observation. The Japanese Type 16 maneuver combat vehicle, introduced in 2016, embodies similar principles. 8-wheeled chassis, maximum speed 62 miles per hour, 105 millimeter gun, thin armor. Japanese procurement documents explicitly cite the M18's combat record as historical validation for accepting vulnerability in exchange for mobility. The American M11-28 mobile gun system, despite its controversial service record, represents institutional memory of the M18's success. Mounting a 105 millimeter gun on a striker-wheeled chassis, the M11-28 was designed for rapid deployment and shoot-and-scoot tactics virtually identical to M18 doctrine. Though the vehicle ultimately underperformed in Iraq and Afghanistan, its design philosophy descended directly from the Hellcats' proven principles. The final months of World War II in Europe demonstrated the complete psychological transformation the M18 had achieved. By March 1945, German tactical communications intercepted by Ultra decrypts routinely classified sectors with Hellcat presence as requiring special anti-armor preparation. This designation, previously reserved for Soviet Guards tank formations or heavy tank battalions, now applied to American units with fewer than 20 M18s. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion crossed the Rhine in late March 1945 as part of the Third Army's drive into southern Germany. German resistance remained fierce in isolated pockets, but the pattern of engagement had fundamentally changed. Battalion records note that in 47 separate instances between March 23rd and April 30th, German forces abandoned prepared positions upon confirmed identification of M18s, even when German forces possessed numerical and positional advantages. Lieutenant Colonel George Jacobson, commanding the 704th, wrote in his final combat report, "The enemy's psychological defeat is complete. We have engaged German armor only twice in the past 30 days. In all other instances, enemy forces withdrew or refused to commit armor when our vehicles were identified. Our role has become more psychological than physical. We don't have to destroy enemy armor. We merely have to be present, and enemy armor removes itself from the equation." This represented the ultimate vindication of the M18's design philosophy. A vehicle created to hunt tanks had become so psychologically effective that it rarely needed to fire its gun. German commanders, faced with Hellcat presence, chose to preserve their dwindling armor for more favorable circumstances that never materialized. The human cost behind these statistics deserves recognition. 216 M18s destroyed meant approximately 500 crew members killed or seriously wounded, accounting for the 73% survival rate. These casualties occurred primarily in the most aggressive battalions, units that pushed the M18's capabilities to their limits. The 609th Tank Destroyer Battalion lost 41 M18s in 8 months of combat, the highest loss rate among Hellcat units. Yet even this battalion maintained positive kill ratios and received unit citations for extraordinary battlefield effectiveness. Staff Sergeant Ernest Kovacs, 609th Tank Destroyer Battalion, survived 4 M18 losses and 3 Purple Hearts. His post-war reflection captures the mindset that made the vehicle effective. We knew the odds. Every time we went out, we knew we might not come back. But we also knew we had the fastest, most maneuverable tank destroyer in the world. We controlled the engagement. That control was worth more than any armor plate. I'd rather have the ability to choose when to fight than all the armor in the world, forcing me to sit still and take hits. The M18 Hellcat story ultimately reveals fundamental truths about military innovation that transcend its specific historical moment. Superior specifications don't guarantee superior effectiveness. The vehicle that looked wrong by every conventional measure, that weighed half what doctrine suggested, that sacrificed survivability for speed, proved more psychologically and tactically effective than American heavy tanks that matched German armor plate for plate. The morning of September 21st, 1944, when Oberleutnant Klaus Beumer first heard that strange, high-pitched engine whine through Lorraine's morning mist, marked the beginning of a psychological transformation that would ripple through German panzer forces for the remainder of the war. Within weeks, that sound became associated with helplessness, with watching carefully aimed shots miss targets that vanished before fire could be returned, with knowing that armor thickness and crew training meant nothing against an opponent operating by fundamentally different rules. Beumer survived the war, surrendering to American forces in Bavaria in May 1945. In a 1968 interview conducted by American military historians, he reflected on his evolution from confident panzer commander to defeated veteran. September 19, 1944, I believed German armor was qualitatively superior to anything the Americans fielded. Our Panthers were heavier, better armed, better protected. By October, I understood we had been asking the wrong questions. The Americans didn't try to build better Panthers. They built vehicles that made Panthers irrelevant. That's a kind of genius we never possessed. His admission cuts to the essential truth. German engineering excellence had created the finest heavy tanks in history. But American innovation had rendered heavy tanks less relevant by creating a vehicle that refused to fight the battles heavy tanks were designed to win. The M18 didn't defeat Panthers through superior armor or firepower. It defeated them by making those attributes irrelevant through superior mobility and tactical flexibility. Technical Sergeant John Patterson, 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, summarized the M18's philosophy with brutal clarity in a 1946 interview. The Hellcat wasn't about fair fights. It was about unfair fights in our favor. We'd hit them where they didn't expect, when they didn't expect, and be gone before they knew what happened. Fair fight means you give the enemy a chance. We weren't interested in giving them chances. We were interested in killing tanks and going home alive. This pragmatism, this rejection of fighting conventions that favored the enemy, represented American military thinking at its most effective. German doctrine emphasized honor in combat, decisive engagement, superior performance in direct confrontation. American doctrine, as embodied by the M18, emphasized winning efficiently, using asymmetric advantages, refusing to fight on enemy terms. The collision between these philosophies was never going to end well for the side that insisted on following its own rules. By May 1945, when German forces surrendered unconditionally, the M18 had achieved something no other Allied armored vehicle managed. It had fundamentally altered German tactical behavior and broken German panzer psychological dominance. Not through superior engineering, not through overwhelming numbers, but through conceptual innovation that asked different questions and found better answers. The high-pitched whine of that right radial engine, echoing through French villages and German forests in the final year of war, became the sound of tactical obsolescence. German crews who heard it and survived learned a lesson the Wehrmacht never institutionally absorbed. In warfare, as in nature, survival doesn't always favor the strongest or most heavily armed. Sometimes it favors the fastest, the most adaptable, the most willing to break rules everyone else follows. The M18 Hellcat stands as testament to American military innovation at its most creative and effective. Faced with German tactical and technical superiority, American designers didn't attempt to match German strengths. They negated them. The result was a vehicle that looked like it shouldn't work, violated every principle of contemporary tank destroyer design, and yet proved devastatingly effective precisely because it rejected conventional wisdom. German tankers feared the tiny American M18 more than any heavy tank because the Hellcat represented something more terrifying than superior enemy equipment. It represented the invalidation of everything their doctrine taught, everything their training prepared them for, everything their experience had confirmed. Their armor didn't matter if they couldn't use it. Their superior guns didn't matter if they couldn't aim them in time. Their tactical excellence didn't matter if engagements ended before they could apply it. In the end, the M18's 55-mile-per-hour top speed was never just a technical specification. It was a paradigm shift, a rejection of accepted wisdom, proof that in warfare, as in innovation, the greatest victories sometimes come not from playing the game better than your opponent, but from changing the rules of the game entirely.